On November 1959, just 1 month after its television premiere, science fiction horror anthology series The Twilight Zone aired the episode Time Enough at Last. The episode tells the story of a bookish man that somehow survived the apocalypse and decides to spend it making his way through his reading backlog. It's an iconic episode based on a short story published in an issue of If, Worlds of Science Fiction. And that's to say nothing of the fiction made decades and even centuries and millennia before that. People, regardless of the time period, have been obsessed with the idea of immortality, the open-endedness of the topic, allowing for people to take the concept in any direction they choose. So this begs the question, what do you do with forever? Robots have become a natural staple of anime and manga. Regardless of the decade, you'll be able to spot at least a handful of robots, whether it be the more obvious mecha, the smaller mascotty helper guys, or the more ambiguous ones that are robot in name but otherwise pass for human. But like, why though? In his 2006 book, Loving the Machine, The Art and Science of Japanese Robots, author Timothy Horniak observes how Osamu Tezuka's hit manga Astro Boy embodies a deeply ingrained post-war vision of pacifism and technology. Like many Japanese who survived the US atomic and fire bombings of cities during World War II, Tezuka knew the awesome and horrific power of science all too well. In the face of a reality that arguably showed humanity at its worst, Tezuka wanted to create a story that imagined a better world. This isn't to say that Astro Boy and its contemporaries were nothing but blatant escapism, however. If anything, post-war manga wished to come to terms with the sheer amounts of violence experienced over a single generation, acknowledge the atrocities enacted, while presenting their best foot forward for the future. And it's in this optimism and hope for the future that sets the backdrop for a majority of robots in anime.
Did they do that to me too?
Every one of us has been altered by Black Ghost.
While clearly made in the shadow of World War II and tackling matters of war and those affected, the series also explores marginalized voices as a whole, the series almost acting like a Japanese X-Men of sorts, which, side note, both came out pretty close to each other, though it's less a plagiarism thing and more a the threat of world destruction makes people contemplate a better tomorrow thing. And if that takes the form of everyday civilians beating up bigots, then who am I to argue? What makes the 009 anime such a solid action anime is that every single one of its heroes has that classic Peter Parker look to them, or in fancy pants literary terms, they suffer a lot of Pyrrhic victories. While the cyborgs are able to save the day, it's always at the cost of some part of their well-being as a person, and no episode epitomizes this better than Frozen Time. The episode starts off simply enough, with the titular 009, aka Joe, undergoing maintenance repair by the professor. Meanwhile, the city's downtown district gets hit with a truck after its driver falls asleep at the wheel. But just as the truck is about to explode, 009 wakes up prematurely from his maintenance. He goes to the living room where he meets 003, only to be confused when she's frozen mid-walk. 009 correctly guesses he's accidentally in acceleration mode, while everyone else around him appears to be in frozen time. What 009 can't figure out this time, though, is how to turn off his accelerator. He eventually makes his way into the city where he sees the almost explosion. He realizes he can't touch anything or else he'll burn up from the accelerated friction, and you'd think this would be the majority of the episode, like an anime version of that scene in The Flash where he carries the babies in the microwave. But it becomes increasingly clear that the episode has zero interest in this plot, being resolved in the first half of the episode, with the latter half focusing on this poor man's suffering as he's cut off from the rest of the world. Because of the nature of episodic TV, seeing the resolution play out, only for there to be like 10 minutes left in the episode, really adds to the episode's overall sense of unease. It's like when your parents are watching crime drama slop and the supposed villain is caught, but there's still too much episode left so you know they caught the wrong guy. Add to this the minimal music, occasionally accompanied by Joe's own narration, and it really makes for this eerie, unearthly feel. You're stuck with nothing but Joe's thoughts as hours turn into days. It kinda plays out like he's stranded on a deserted island, Joe's hopelessness turning into the only thing he can rely on. With every day passing by, he looks out into the sea, the waves fully detailed and painted since they too are frozen. Eventually the days turn into a month, and the acceleration just wears off. On paper this feels supremely cheap, but in execution I'd argue the episode accomplishes what it sets out to do. Ishinomori would have been 26 when he started the original manga, pitting him at around 7 when World War II ended. Far too young to be an active participant, but old enough to witness how war took its toll on the older generation. From the get-go, Cyborg 009 was always a heavily anti-war series, and as such, it's not completely far-fetched to say that Ishinomori wanted to explore those more peripheral ideas, these war-adjacent concepts. Frozen Time takes the time to sit in this awkward silence of somebody that is clearly unwell. Joe, alongside the other cyborgs, are victims of a larger entity that have dedicated their lives to harming others. It's only natural for Joe and the others to have these deep-seated feelings on their situation, yet lack this fundamental understanding to pick apart the why of it all. When Joe's accelerator wears off, he never tells the others what happened, he never tells them how long he's spent in accelerated time, and yet when he comes to, he simply laughs it off and goes about his day. Because when you're forced into living forever without any other human contact, your knee-jerk reaction will be to put it all behind you the second you escape it. But the rest of the series is fun and quirky, so don't sleep on it.
Our world began to crumble, and there is nothing we can do to stop it.
I know nothing. Yet my enemies call me Casshern.
It's the end of the world and everybody hates you. That's the general premise of Casshern Sins, the 2008 edgy experimental remake of the 70s show that may or may not have influenced Mega Man. While this remake did gain enough notoriety for it to get some airtime on Toonami in 2012, I'd honestly say it's more high concept than a straight action series. Complimentary. While the general premise of a forlorn amnesiac Casshern traveling a post-apocalyptic robot wasteland permeates every episode, what happens from episode to episode is very vibes-based. Maybe he goes to a concert, maybe he meets some orphans, maybe he finds a dog, I don't know, it's all played very loosey-goosey. Okay, backtrack. Casshern Sins tells the edgy story of this edgy robot Casshern as he travels an edgy post-apocalyptic world following a possibly edgy event known as the Ruin, which he supposedly caused after killing Luna, also known as the Sun Named Moon. Something the series always makes a point of addressing, if only because it sounds really cool.
You took the life of the sun that was named Moon. The sun that was called Moon. The sun that was named Moon.
I'm the one who took the life of the sun that was named Moon.
I would expect nothing less from the one who killed the sun named Moon.
Following the Ruin, all robots have essentially gained the ability to die, with exception to Casshern, who is seemingly immortal. While some robots are convinced killing Casshern will undo the Ruin, others have accepted their mortality and have chosen to live their remaining life with meaning and dignity. It's heavy-handed and kinda obnoxious at face value, but what saves the series is just how experimental it can get. Helmed by series director Shigeyasu Yamauchi, the episode-to-episode nature of the series is this fun mishmash of post-apocalypse contrasted with these occasional sparks of vibrant lighting, working more like an anthology with Casshern serving as this through line, too sad to live but too dumb to die. A lot of episodes are formed through the questions he poses himself, with this almost existential crisis of the week format, characters seemingly coming and going as they please through this endless wasteland. It allows for a lot of experimentation visually, with stuff like Episode 8's concert being less possible in something more structured and continuity heavy. What little lore we get to tie everything together is primarily done through Luna, the often mentioned but rarely seen victim of Casshern's supposed killing. I know the god metaphors are obvious with her, so I'm gonna go the alternate route and say that Luna is like the Star Wars of the Casshern world. Regardless of the person, everyone seems to have some kind of opinion on Luna. Is she good? Is she bad? Would she have been better written if George Lucas was still in charge? Who's to say? When we actually do get to see her, it's always kind of up in the air as to whether she's even real or not, typically shrouded in this ethereal light, or giving this grin like she's about to do something to you. Plus, we're probably like a good year into the robot apocalypse in-universe, so everyone just sounds so naturally on edge and paranoid that it's hard to take anyone's word at face value, which I kinda like when a series intentionally messes with the audience like that. I feel like a lesser series would pit Luna vs. Casshern with little to no villains in between. So while the more blatant antagonists of Breaking Boss, Dio, and Lita could feel like they overcrowd the story, it actually gives a well-needed break from all the philosophical headiness going on. Dio essentially being the palette swap version of Casshern is some Mortal Kombat levels of silliness, but at the same time, his arc as a villain also living through the ruin adds some welcome perspective for what having a rival during the post-apocalypse even means. Like, at this point it's just universally accepted that the ruin is gonna kill every robot on the planet, and yet Dio is still here popping up in the middle of the episode to be like, fight me. So when he shows up later on and he admits fighting Casshern gives meaning to his life, you're like, oh yeah, that's the stuff. It's such a weird mishmash of heady philosophy and shonen action, but it does answer what one would do with forever. In this case, take a long meandering stroll with your dog. It's all very non-committal to any hard answers to the hard questions it poses, and its minimalist approach to story structure, again, makes it a bit heady, but also, can you really discuss matters of life and death in any other way?
You gotta check your mirrors, just side of your eye. Side of your eye. One. He might be okay.
In 1993, the Harold Ramis-directed movie Groundhog Day discusses the matters of life and death through the lens of a comedy. The movie stars Bill Murray as a jaded TV weatherman forced to relive Groundhog Day in the small town of Punxsutawney. While not technically the first time loop story in popular culture, it did cement the idea to a broader audience. To date, there's been a slow but sure rise in time loop movies, with a notable spike in the 2010s and 20s that may or may not be due to COVID. Who's to say? At this point, it's clear the premise has taken a life of its own, influencing fiction across all mediums, from movies to books to games, and especially anime.
ダーリンとお母様やお父様やてんちゃんや周太郎やメガネさんたちとずーっと楽しく暮らしてきたいっちゃ。
Urusei Yatsura is probably the first thing you think of when it comes to retro anime aesthetics. While it blends elements of school life, romance, and science fiction, it adheres first and foremost to the tried and true formula of the sitcom genre. Make its characters as unlikable as possible, and find entertainment from the chaos that ensues. So, what happens when you take such a wacky boilerplate premise out of its natural element? Beautiful Dreamer is the second movie to come from the original Urusei Yatsura anime. It was directed by one Mamoru Oshii, years before either of his iconic Ghost in the Shell movies, and 1 year before his artsy-fartsy cult classic, Angel's Egg. So, of course he's going to test what he was and wasn't able to get away with. Like, not only does he sideline Lum, the literal face of the series and poster, but he makes a point of keeping her in all outfits except her iconic tiger bikini the entire movie. Truly a man ahead of his time. In an A&N interview in 2017, Oshii admits, "I made Beautiful Dreamer in reverse. You have the world, this world with a special structure, then you have the story, and the characters come last. Thinking about the movie in and of itself, I still don't think this was the wrong decision. It was a spin-off of a long-established series, which is why Beautiful Dreamer was greenlit in the first place. The characters were already established. So what happens if you try that with a standalone 90-minute movie? That was Angel's Egg." We open with the entirety of the school in full-on prep mode for the school festival, with these absolutely crammed scenes of students carrying props, tools, and pop culture Easter eggs, all while announcements are made in vain over the PA system, trying to corral everyone in. From the get-go, we as the audience fully understand that the kids are the ones in charge, and the adults just gotta deal with it. This is only further underlined when homeroom teacher Onsen Mark and the school nurse Miss Sakura end up being the first to consciously realize that they've been living in an eternal time loop.
デジャブというやつじゃな。疲れた時に人間の脳が生み出す偽りの体験じゃ。
私もそう思っておりました。
Where every day is the day right before the school festival. But even if the adults have pinpointed what's going on, they have zero control when it comes to what happens next. I think everyone can relate to the sheer uncanniness of having to go to school at a time outside of school hours, this sense of uncanny loneliness. Early scenes like Mendo and Ataru going for a food run really drive home the idea that school is this inescapable planet the students are stuck in the orbit of. And once students and staff slowly begin to disappear, it becomes even more apparent that the movie at its core is about liminal spaces. Yeah, before the backrooms, Exudate, or Skinamarink, Oshii perfectly captured the atmospheric unease brought on by a very specific type of isolation where you can't even tell night from day. He takes that natural single-mindedness you get when working long hours on a project with no clear end, and extracts solely the vibes from the experience. And this uneasiness just compounds the deeper into the movie we get. Unanswered phones, MC Escher homages, the movie just goes all in on the unnerving visuals. Even the movie itself has this dreamlike quality to its story structure. Once the kids learn that they're stuck in a time loop, it becomes less about them wanting to escape it, and more about learning how to coexist with something they've all agreed is this unsolvable phenomenon. The cast is out living their 80s music video dreams because they just accepted the hopelessness of their situation, and have decided to vibe out with the time they have left. I know this movie came out like 30 years before COVID, but you really can't help but think of COVID with this movie. Beautiful Dreamer's most iconic shot is this one, near the opening scene of Lum atop the tank. But thematically, I'd say that the chiming clock without arms is its most powerful. It serves as a centerpiece to the school itself, but without the context of time or even place, its chimes fall on deaf ears. Beautiful Dreamer is probably both the most bleak and also the most hopeful of the series I talk about, depending on who you ask. So, what do you do with forever? The same thing you'd be doing even if the world wasn't ending. Your daily routine serving equal parts comforting and suffocating. Okay, I'm sure this is just the vocal minority, but I still gotta address it. People that hate on Tatami Galaxy because it's pretentious clearly just don't want to eat their anime vegetables. They see the lofty animation, art direction, and dense dialogue as these signifiers that it lacks any narrative handholds for the audience to really get a grip on the story, when at the end of the day, Tatami Galaxy is about shooting your shot with a girl you like. We open on a nameless loser college student that's stuck in a time loop. He yearns for that rose-colored campus life where he joins a club, meets a raven-haired beauty, and yeah, he hasn't really thought things through past that. Every episode is like a what-if scenario, where he decides to commit to a different club on his first day of school. And yet, regardless of his choice in the club, the episode ultimately ends in not just his day, but his entire 4-year college life getting absolutely ruined by Ozu, his one friend and absolute troll. While the main character treats Ozu like this human rash he can't quite get rid of, the fact that he's somehow a universal constant in his life regardless of the choices made is honestly kinda cute. And yet because the main character is in his own head more often than not, he can't help but frame Ozu as this scourge to his life that brings nothing but grief, hatred, and most importantly, no raven-haired beauty. Interestingly enough, when you compare Tatami Galaxy to its source material light novel, you'll notice that in the light novel's alternate routes, the main character does in fact get with a raven-haired beauty at the end of every loop. Contrast this to the anime, where Akashi, the raven-haired beauty in question, is always just out of arm's reach. Like, all the main character has to do is talk to her for a little bit longer to understand that they're both into each other, but he doesn't, and it's infuriating every time. The main character really builds up all this frustration and mistakenly directs it all at Ozu without even considering for a second that maybe the problem is himself. The series does this a handful of times actually. Like, from the get-go, the main character has a knack for narrating at like 3 times the normal speed.
ここでオメオメと未来を下方修正していいのか。太陽を目指すことなく地上でのうのうと暮らして何がイカロスか。それではただの羽が目障りな男ではないか。
But the more you watch, the more fluent you become in main character ease, to the point that you realize he honestly doesn't have much to say. And the show realizes this too, as it starts to truncate a lot of the main character's dialogue, since we already know the gist of what he's gonna say next.
学生さん、何をお聞きになりたいんでしょう。
私は何も尋ねていない。
なるほど。あなたは不満なのですね。
It's an intentional choice, not just for our sanity, but to also plant the seed that maybe everything the main character says shouldn't be taken at face value. Tatami Galaxy isn't a time loop story in the way you'd consider one, mainly because the main character isn't fully aware that he's reliving his college years on repeat. The time loop effect is only happening to us, the audience, as we see the main character go through the same mistakes regardless of his initial different choices. With every loop, we relate to the main character's frustration at his lack of a fulfilling college life. Yet at the same time, we slowly realize that he's setting his own reality to an unrealistic standard. However, he never realizes this because he's never aware of the time loop he's stuck in. Until the final episodes.
俺たち前にもこんな言い合いしてなかったか？
してるわけないでしょ。デジャブですよ、デジャブ。
Having finally gone down a route in college that's so hilariously bad he messes up not one but 3 separate romances, the main character decides that the best action is inaction, and instead of stressing over which college group to join, he instead chooses to join no clubs at all, choosing to stay in his small tatami apartment. It is then that the story finally shifts to a more traditional time loop story, as the main character tries to exit his room only to be met by a labyrinth of other similar tatami rooms. Now clearly stuck in a hell of his own making, he traverses this never-ending galaxy of tatamis in search of a way out, coming to notice that every room reflects a life had he chosen a different path. There are slight variations in every room, including books, food, toys, and in one case, a giant restaurant sign. And he realizes that he was focusing so much on his own idea of what a good life should be, that he's been failing to appreciate the life he was currently living. Each loop, for how badly they ended, at least stemmed from taking definitive action. Compare that to this final loop, where indecision and inaction has only led to further wallowing in one's own chain of what-ifs. You see this a lot, even in non-time loop anime, where the character will literally trap themselves in self-doubt and what-ifs. It works especially well in time loop anime because thematically they really aren't too different from each other. This self-imposed cage of sorts, where only self-realization will set you free. I like Tatami Galaxy because it takes a simple message and packages it in the most interesting way possible. It's like a Reese's peanut butter cup, but with mild bouts of depression. So what do you do with Forever? In this case, you talk to the girl, give away the money, and scarf like 50 Costellas in a row. For as fun as it paints the concept of forever in, it really ultimately frowns upon it, essentially comparing it to a bad habit that needs to be broken before any true growth will occur. So, what happens when such a curse is treated like a gift? Immortals are practically a character archetype in anime at this point, right up there with the stoic girls, emo boys, and the dead moms with the homely low ponytails. Unlike those other tropes though, it's one of those things where the concept is typically too big to save solely for a side character. If you have an immortal in your cast, your story can go one of two ways. You either have immortality as a major part of your story, or you're that guy that really wants to shoehorn a lolly as your minor character. And yet having someone that is literally unkillable feels like it would be too overpowered a concept to actually create any captivating stories for, right?
誰を中心に据えるかで同じ事件は千変万化に姿を変える。
Baccano probably takes the most head-empty just-keep-living approach to answering what one would do with Forever, but just because it's dumb with its messaging doesn't mean it's dumb in its execution. It's like a prestigious kind of dumb. Criterion dumb. I feel like Baccano is right up there with Bebop and Ghost in the Shell in terms of anime you can recommend to people that don't like anime, and yet it seems to have really fallen off in regards to its notoriety, which is really weird considering that the series creator Ryogo Narita's other work was Durarara. They've also released light novel tie-ins for Bleach and the Fate series, so I think it's clear that bare minimum, they have a fascination with fantastical stories with large ensemble casts. Baccano tells the interwoven stories of passengers that gained immortality in the 1700s. Through their literal deal with the devil, the passengers of the Advina Avis acquire said immortality through a replicable formula, only for said formula to eventually make its way into a stash of bootleg liquor by the 1920s. From the get-go, Baccano makes a point to acknowledge that reality doesn't have main characters, and as such, it takes this almost childlike pleasure in bouncing back and forth between its growing cast, each of whom may or may not have gained immortality over the years. Part of the appeal being that initially you have no idea who is an immortal, which feels especially important considering all these characters are in constant peril, being caught up in gangs, cults, or may or may not be serial killers. Characters like Master Thieves Isaac and Miria have this big Team Rocket energy, where even if they're technically the bad guys, their worst offense is stealing every scene they're in. Other cast members like the hitman Lad Russo suffers from extreme main character syndrome, only to get karma'd time and time again as he's faced with immortals and people just better than him. Every character is a main character, and yet because of that, nobody is. I say all this because Baccano treats its characters and themes with the same matter-of-fact approach. Immortality, this grandiose super ability, is initially treated like a science, but because its formula was replicated, its magic and mystique are watered down over the years, quite literally. Immortality changes from this gift granted by the devil to this thing you can make and give to a buddy you meet by chance in a bar. I like comparing it to grapes. Grapes are honestly this kind of mid-tier fruit you can buy in any grocery store, but like, if you go back to the Roman Empire, you're seeing kings-fed grapes like it's this luxury item. Baccano grapifies the concept of immortality, and I think that's pretty cool. In a time when nothing is treated with any reverence anymore, it would be so easy for Baccano to develop a cynical approach to what you do with forever. Yet, instead, it's able to take what is honestly a really scary concept and frame it as this communal experience. Forever doesn't seem daunting as long as you're able to share it with someone. Anyone, as long as they pass the vibe check. Baccano is unafraid to say that, in the face of unending life, the immediate goal will always be to find the closest party. But what happens when that party ends?
魔王を倒したからといって終わりじゃない。この先の人生の方が長いんだ。
それもそっか。
At the time of this video, Frieren really doesn't need an introduction. It is a series that spawned a million memes, it led a million weebs to their gilf awakening, it's that rare anime that has crossover appeal to every quadrant of otaku fandom, but like, why though? Frieren dares to ask not what you do with forever, but what you do with the time you have left. The titular Frieren is an elf that partook in the defeat of the Demon King. After a 10-year journey with her party composed of Aizen the Dwarf, Hyter the Drunken Priest, and of course, Himmel the Hero.
僕の故郷の花でね、美しいんだ。まあ、僕ほどではないんだけどね。
そろそろ行こうか。
Being an elf, Frieren's lifespan is significantly longer than the rest of her party members, and yet because of that, she always takes life for granted. Decades to other characters are treated by her more like days or weeks, and yet this inability to empathize and view time from a shorter-lived mortal's point of view is framed less as this intentional ignorance, and more as this innocent, almost childlike mentality. Why treat these party members like my friends when I traveled with them for only 10 years? Why even bother forging meaningful connections when they'll be gone in a matter of decades? But then 50 years pass after their victory over the Demon King, and Himmel dies, and Frieren realizes the sanctity of the time spent with her party, no matter how short it was in her eyes. Life is precious because it's finite, and Frieren only learned this after the fact.
なんでもっと知ろうと思わなかったんだろう。
This is all to say that Frieren learns about YOLO the same way white college students learn about racism. While Frieren herself isn't an immortal, time to an extent is meaningless to her. She kinda treats it the same way Saitama treats strength in One Punch Man. The heart of both series lies in them playing with tropes and deciding to keep their camera on their characters for a bit longer in this almost documentary style approach. What do you do once you've reached the pinnacle of strength? What do you do once you've slain the Demon King? Heck, if you want to stretch things, even Shrek plays around with the tropes on a similar level. It's this natural curiosity to want to see what happens after Happily Ever After, even though functionally, the story should have run out of things to say by now. Frieren at the start of her series is just coming to grips with the fact that her story will continue, even as those around her pass. So like, what do you do when granted that extra time? For as big of a question this presents, Frieren never really seems to stress over it, because while her life may be finite just like everyone else's, she still has time. Maybe she'll revisit some old places from past journeys, or search every nook and cranny for a new tome. Or maybe she'll get a higher education, that's important too. This is her comeback. But I think what's interesting about the concept of immortality is that the term is usually framed from the villain's perspective. Living forever is usually seen as this inherently bad thing that only the bad guys would ever want, and in the case that you try to get it, you're meant to fail while everyone else around you cheers for sucking so bad. So, what happens when a villain gains immortality? Pool energy thingies coming out of hands didn't exist in anime before Dragon Ball, and the second they did, a million other anime copied it. Think about it. While a lot of Western fans are quick to write off Dragon Ball Sans the Z for being too childish or whimsical, they fail to realize just how Z-coded those last two Dragon Ball arcs are. The King Piccolo arc is a key inflection point to the greater Dragon Ball mythos going forward. Not only does it start with the death of Krillin, but his death sparks a literal outward change in Goku. Usually this happy-go-lucky little guy, absolutely traumatized by the death of his closest friend. Much like villains before him, King Piccolo seeks power through the Dragon Balls, though unlike previous villains, his wish isn't for immortality, but for eternal youth.
世界征服ごときがそんなボールの力を借りんでも造作もないことじゃよ。
And he actually gets it. And he kills the dragon while he's at it. Best Dragon Ball villain hands down, and it's not even close. What makes King Piccolo an interesting villain is that he approaches his generic bad guy plans of world domination with a certain level of world weariness to him. When he's introduced, he's this supremely wrinkly, old, 8-foot-tall thing. His wish for eternal youth isn't a fleeting desire for a concept he has no understanding of, but this premeditated, fully thought out plan he sets into motion. To him, world domination and living forever is something fully attainable by his own merits, and his youth is the springboard he'll use to get it. And the series never really punishes him for gaining back his youth either. Usually in pop culture, when the villain gets their evil wish granted, there's this certain level of karmic punishment that happens afterward. But in King Piccolo's case, Goku ends up killing him, and King Piccolo's response is like, "We must go younger," and he spawns a baby Piccolo, complete with the memories of his King Piccolo self. It's never the eternal youth that's on trial here, it's the everything else, which is admittedly still pretty bad. Compare that to Frieza, more iconic than King Piccolo, yes, but also a far cry from him in every possible way. If King Piccolo is the aging boomer that pulled himself up by his bootstraps to get what he wanted, Frieza is the spoiled nepo baby that gets what he wants, even if what he wants are these half-baked concepts he's never even fully cognizant of. Like, immortality in Dragon Ball is almost treated as a joke by the time Frieza's introduced. Literally half the cast has been resurrected at least once, and yet Frieza's still like, "Ooh, shiny new thing, gimme." Plus he doesn't even get his wish. He does kill the dragon, but it's more out of a technicality, so I don't really count it. This is all to say that immortality in the Dragon Ball world is an absolute farce, and King Piccolo was the only bad guy to realize this. He's rewarded by having his son live on to be the greatest uncle of all time. Meanwhile, Frieza gets some karmic punishment in hell, living in this cocoon thing while tortured with wholesome Disney fairies. Actually, on that note. Tangentially related, Limbo is usually seen as the explicitly bad ending to immortality. You suddenly have all the time in the world, and yet you're being punished by having no means to pursue the interests that made you human to begin with. In the case of villains aiming for immortality, they are punished for wanting too much out of life. But what happens when you weren't seeking it to begin with? What happens when you are granted an existence so open-ended that not even your identity as a human is even guaranteed? Death Note is very much Baby's first edgelord anime for a reason. It addresses themes of morality, death, and the law through the lens of this self-righteous smarty-pants that the plot goes out of its way to prove is always the smartest person in the room. Until he's not. It's convoluted, overly written, very openly misogynistic, and yet you can't deny its place in anime history for being one of the first dialogue-heavy anime to really break through the mainstream. While the series itself doesn't delve directly into themes of living forever, it does brush shoulders with the concept of godhood in its main character Light Yagami, even if it's merely set dressing as this vague goal he wishes to aspire to. In 2007, the anime was recut into a compilation movie, Death Note Relight Visions of a God. As far as compilation movies go, it's your standard clip show fare, but it does give the very interesting framing device of retelling the story through Ryuk to a nameless Shinigami in the Shinigami realm. As far as moments in the lore ripe for fleshing out, the Shinigami realm remains one of the most major aspects of the story that remains intentionally fuzzy. From what we know, it's a barren wasteland, and the Shinigami themselves, while reliant on killing humans to expand their own lives, don't really care about doing so since they're living long enough lives as it is. Contrast this to humans who utilize the Death Note, who don't get any years added to their own lifespan when killing. Enter Light Yagami. Not only does he actively use his Death Note to kill others, but he's also indirectly responsible for the deaths and general misfortunes of multiple people throughout the series. Light's kill count at the very least has to be in the thousands, if not more. Something that would translate to thousands of years gained if he were a Shinigami. I bring all this up because of a certain fan theory popularized by what should have been an inconsequential new line added to an inconsequential movie.
言ってみるがいいさ。運が良けやとんでもねえやつがノートを拾って一生忘れられねえ面白えもん見れるだろうよ。そうだろう。なあ、ライト。
At face value and a normal amount of media literacy, one would conclude that Ryuk is reminiscing about his time with Light, even though he clearly is not in the same room with him. From a brain rot perspective, people really clung on to this exchange, assuming that the nameless Shinigami was indeed a reborn light, and you can see why that would make sense. Of the humans, he's owned a Death Note the longest, and there's next to no lore surrounding the Shinigami realm, the Shinigami themselves, or how their world even works, so that leaves the doors wide open for interpretation. It's a fun theory because there isn't just simple wiggle room for it to work, there is full-on ballroom dance levels of room for it to work cleanly into the lore. There's a lot of discourse surrounding Death Note regarding whether or not Light is framed as a sympathetic hero or an outright villain, and in the case of the anime, it very clearly frames him as the former. Light being turned into a Shinigami would suggest that he received his long sought after godhood after all, but also that godhood is a dime a dozen status granted to anyone. The Shinigami we see might as well be neats living in an empty apartment slowly getting buried in piles of trash they're too lazy to take outside. So what do you do with forever? Lays about doing nothing in particular, relying on someone else to zap you out of your doldrums. Truly the highest form of limbo imaginable. Unless...
Life in this world may be meaningless, but still, cool things happen every now and then.
Sunny Boy is if the original Jumanji was told by means of FLCL. Let me explain. Okay, so in the original Jumanji, kids Alan Parrish and Sarah Whittle play the titular board game, only for Alan to get sucked into the game. 26 years later, some new kids, Judy and Peter, play the game, freeing Alan, who is now a fully aged adult, played by Robin Williams.
What year is it?
1995, remember?
The events of the movie then unfold, resulting in the game finally being completed, and the board game undoing all the chaos it unleashed, sending Alan and Sarah back to their child bodies from 26 years ago. Time passes, and the now adult Alan and Sarah once again meet Judy and Peter, the movie ending without any clarification as to whether the kids actually remember them. Now imagine if instead of Robin Williams, it was an entire class of kids that get magically disappeared for seemingly unknown reasons. Also pair that with Japanese indie rock music and an episode-by-episode sensibility that makes you wonder if you skipped an episode, or if you're even watching the same show to begin with, that's Sunny Boy. Honestly, it's the type of series that's difficult to talk about, not really due to its content, but because it really is the type of media that's open to interpretation. So, let's get to interpreting. While Shingo Natsume's first foray into directing was from an episode of Tatami Galaxy, his work slowly ramped up in notoriety, moving from Space Dandy to the first season of One Punch Man, not to mention boarding the opening themes for Season 3 of Haikyuu and Spy Family. It's a very eclectic body of work, but it's this insistence on keeping things fresh that has led to Sunny Boy turning out the way it did. When finally given the chance to helm a wholly original anime project not based on any pre-existing properties, it's clear that Natsume did not take this opportunity lightly. Literally anything goes in the series, but that's the point. Unlike the vaguely anthological nature of something like a Casshern Sins or even Tatami Galaxy, the episodes in Sunny Boy are so disconnected from each other that, besides the first and the last episodes, you could really dive in at any point and understand just about as much as you would if you were to watch in order. Every episode has a certain sense of fairy tale energy to them, where literally anything goes, but that's the point. Oh, this one's about invisible monkeys playing baseball? Okay, sure. This one's about a guy that split himself into two brothers? Tell me more. This one has ants making a Tower of Babel? I mean, that ant's voiced by Dub Krillin, so I guess I'll see where it goes.
Seriously? You really don't know nothing, huh?
You got such a strange mishmash of anything the staff felt like doing, so of course your mileage may vary on what you think of each episode. But I guarantee, the ones that speak to you, do it with the loudest megaphone straight into your soul. The creed of, I don't understand it quite right, but it still pulls my heartstrings, being Natsume's intent for audiences watching the series. While Sunny Boy starts off with the students getting whisked away to a mysterious island in the middle of nowhere armed with superpowers, the appeal is less how they got back and more the implications of being adrift for so long. The series starts off in media res with the kids having confirmed a handful of truths at this point, including that they aren't aging, and that they've been constantly bouncing between different worlds with no signs of their home in sight. You'd think they'd prioritize getting home as quickly as possible, but with every episode shifting gears to a different realm the kids have to figure out the inner workings of, it's less that they've lost all hope for finding their way home, and more that they've just gotten too preoccupied with whatever's in front of them demanding their attention. A few episodes in, the cast runs into students from the same school who've been adrift for 1,000 years, and at this point it's become obvious that the kids have just accepted their fate. But what does that imply for the students? Because there's an unspecified amount of time passed between episodes, we the audience aren't really following a linear story, and are more just checking in on this constantly changing community, akin to something like a Sims or Tomodachi Life. Maybe the mean guy put his ego aside long enough to be friends with everyone else for a bit. Maybe the shy girl is gonna get the confidence to confess to the rebel boy. For as fantastical as that initial premise is, you start to get numb to all that and end up focusing on the human interactions, almost out of necessity. Like, there's no way you're gonna follow the science fiction aspect of everything on a first watch, so you almost have no other choice but to focus on the human drama aspect, and the series is structured that way by design. A lot of Sunny Boy's appeal are those human-to-human interactions, in big part because the director Natsume made a point to exclude anime's more traditional internal monologues. Because we miss so much time in-world between episodes, it makes us that much more reliant on dialogue not just for character interaction, but for story and lore comprehension. Suddenly, these simple conversations begin to feel more like caveman tribes passing down stories via oral tradition. And that's when you realize that forever doesn't just have to be a literal state, but a status gained by how others see you. The kids may lose track of each other over time, but they reach their own state of forever as long as their peers remember them. Even if you don't live on, what you make, what you contribute, how you make others feel, all that serves as a legacy to be passed down to those willing to listen. Even if it doesn't sound important to you in the moment, it's those tiny stories that piece together who you were as a person and how you'll be remembered. For as meaningless as finding meaning in forever can be, it's also weirdly comforting to see so many media willing to explore the concept. It allows us to seek solace in what might come after death. It lets us explore fears we can never truly conquer. It allows us to be creative and curious in a time when both are being watered down by the poison of convenience.